a warm welcome to day 3 of Classical Next and this conference session, which is titled New Streams, What Can Contemporary Classical Music Offer the Film Industry? My name is Daniel Lewis and I am the Classical Relationship Manager at the UK's leading royalty collection society, which is called PRS for Music. And it's my job to protect and to also promote the value of contemporary classical music. I'm delighted to be joined today by one of our members, Jobina Tinnemans, who is a UK-based composer, originally from the Netherlands, and Jobina works at the nexus of classical music and contemporary art. And here's my good colleague, Jacob Wiltshire, from a company called Pusher. He's the creative director. And Pusher are a bespoke composition and synchronization agency with clients in the media and film industries. And Jacob will tell you a little bit more about that later on. So this session is all about contemporary music and it's about film, but those are quite wide categories. So what I thought we would start off with is, in true Classical Next fashion, we do a quiz. So hopefully everybody here has a handout. In a few moments' time, I'll ask you to kind of discuss with your fellow delegates. And on this handout, there are 2 kind of rows. One with well-known pieces of contemporary classical music and one with famous films. And you can draw a line between the music and the film, and then afterwards we'll see if you got them correct. I understand that not everybody will be really into contemporary music and not everybody will be a film boffin. So what I thought I'd do, I'm feeling nice this morning, I'll give you some clues. So here are the films which are on your handout, and I've written some clues here which I'll just read out from my phone. So, one of the films which features is 2001, A Space Odyssey. So this film is a groundbreaking science fiction film directed by Stanley Kubrick. And in the film, a piece of contemporary classical music is played while the protagonists discover a strange monolith on a foreign planet. The music featured is equally strange and unsettling. We also have an Avengers film called Age of Ultron from 2015. So this is a superhero film featuring famous characters such as Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk. This piece of contemporary music in the film follows the protagonists after they are wounded in battle. So it's quite a somber, sad, reflective piece of music. We also have Tar, which I'm sure many people here have seen. So this is a psychological drama that follows the demise of a fictional conductor called Lydia Tarr. The piece of contemporary music used in this film is from a scene where music students are workshopping music as part of an ensemble class. We also have The Exorcist, which is a seminal horror film which tells the story of a young girl who becomes possessed by a demonic entity. The music used in this film might be described as having a quintessential horror sound. And we also have The Killing of a Sacred Deer, perhaps one of the more niche films on this list, but a really cool film. And this is a psychological and surreal thriller which follows the life of a surgeon and explores themes such as guilt, sacrifice, and morality. And the composer whose work was featured in this film explores similar themes. Finally, there's The Revenant, which is a survival drama which follows the life of a hunter played by Leonardo DiCaprio. Those of you who have seen the film might remember an infamous scene where Leonardo DiCaprio has a fight with a bear. But the movie is also famed by its beautiful landscapes, and the composer featured in this film is also heavily inspired by landscape and explores themes such as climate change. So those are the clues. So what I'd propose doing now is maybe let's spend 5 minutes and let's see if you're able to guess what pieces of music were used in the films. And then we'll reconvene in 5 minutes, and I'll come and walk around the room and see how everybody is getting on. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Perhaps you didn't expect to be quizzed first thing in the morning, so I apologize for that. But I think it's quite a useful exercise just to really frame the kinds of music that we're talking about and the kinds of situations. So in film music, for example, we could be talking about a full-length score, for example, like in the Lord of the Rings or the Harry Potter movies. But in these situations, they're all existing pieces of music which were written for the concert hall. Maybe the composers were commissioned to write them, but then they have their separate life in films elsewhere. So time for the big reveal. Hopefully you had some of these answers correct. So Ligoti's Requiem was, of course, in 2001, A Space Odyssey. That's one of the more famous examples, I think. Arvo Pärd's Berliner Messe was in the Avengers film, Age of Ultron. I wouldn't have expected Arvo Pärt to feature in a superhero film, so I think that's quite interesting. Anna Thorvaldsdottir's Raw was, of course, the piece which featured in the controversial film Lydia Tarr. The conductor Lydia Tarr had some controversial views about Thorvaldsdottir's music in that film, which I disagreed with, but we won't get into all of that today. There's also George Crumb's Black Angels. So Crumb is this composer, and Black Angels perhaps has that quintessential horror sound to it. So that was played in The Exorcist. Sophia Gobaidelina was performed in The Killing of a Sacred Deer. The director of this film is really obsessed, I think, with Gobaidelina's music. It crops up a lot in his movies. And finally, John Luther Adams, his Become Ocean, which is a very nice overlapping piece about the ocean, featured in this very beautiful scene in the film The Revenant, which Leonardo DiCaprio featured in. So, do we have any correct answers? Anybody get them all? Wow. Congratulations. I don't have a prize, but maybe I can buy you a drink later if you go into the Holtz market. So please do come and find me and hold me to that. So yeah, like I said, I thought this is interesting for a number of reasons. I think, first of all, from a cultural perspective, these works, as I said, were probably commissioned from by the composer or by an ensemble or an orchestra from the composer. But they also have this life outside of the concert hall doors. These works are taking on new meanings. Does this challenge how we think about musical works? We're used to thinking of a musical work as if it starts at bar one and finishes at the double bar line, and you perform the piece exactly how the composer intended. Does this challenge that notion? And also from my perspective, as somebody who works with composers to grow their royalty income, this is an additional income stream. When music is used in a film, there's an upfront fee, first of all, called a synchronization fee. And then also there are royalties for every time the films are played in a cinema room like this, and also streamed on the platforms like Netflix. So I thought this was very interesting, and we all did, and decided to team up together. And we worked on a project last year called New Streams, which is what this conference session is named after. And what we decided to do is work with 4 composers in the UK, take some of their concert music, and then we teamed up with a new music ensemble called the Riot Ensemble in the UK. There they are. And we re-recorded the music specifically with the purposes of pitching it to films, which is where Jacob comes into play. So to explore a lot of these ideas and to also give you an idea of how it works, because obviously it's really cool when we have this music placed in films and it sounds all very good, but how does it actually work? And also, what are the creative implications from a composer's perspective? So what I'd like to do now is ask Jacob and Jobina to help me with those very difficult questions. And also, if you have any other examples of contemporary music used in film, please do keep them in mind and share them at the end. And also, if you have any questions about any of this, I'll be sure to leave plenty of time at the end for questions. So to kick things off, I think I'll start with you, Jacob, as our link to the film industry.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
So first of all, can you tell us a little bit about Pusher, who you work for, and also your role within that company?
Yes, so Pusher is a company that represents a roster of artists, musicians, performers, writers. That could be anything from classical music composers to hip hop artists, electronic beat producers, sound design makers, and we sort of work with them to create music for the entertainment marketing space, advertising space, and film and TV space. So my role specifically is working with those artists to sort of think and kind of conceptualize ideas for films and work with our clients closely, music supervisors, to place that music hopefully in those projects.
Fantastic. So you mentioned music supervisors there. I'd quite like to kind of share with everybody the process. So obviously you have a composer who writes the music. People need to play it. Someone needs to record it. Who else is involved in order for us to get music into a film?
Yeah, so I guess we work quite closely with those music supervisors, and those music supervisors are kind of like DJs, I like to think of, that use, email instead of turntables. And they're kind of working closely with the film distributors, the AV studios, and the directors to sort of come to an agreement on finding music that's going to fit their project creatively and work with their budgets and things like that.
Fantastic. So the DJs are receiving, I guess they receive lots of music from various different people.
Yes, they do, and they kind of have usually quite a wide knowledge of music and diggers, basically, looking for music all the time.
And what I think is quite interesting about this is, we're at this conference, which is Classical Next. We all love classical music and we all love contemporary music. But in this world, everything is on the table. And I thought it'd be really interesting to ask you, as someone we've worked with, and you have a curiosity about this style of music, what do you think is special about it, or what appeals to you about it?
I think for me personally, and I could probably say for Pusher as well, with working with composers in this space, is that it's quite exciting to sort of place music that we might find a bit challenging, or people might find challenging on its own, but in the context of like visual media, it gives it a new sort of creative avenue and is able to reach a wider audience and make a bit more sense, really. So I guess that's why the excitement comes in.
Which is really interesting, I think, because we often have these conversations, particularly in contemporary classical music, about reaching new audiences. Perhaps an audience is already there. We gave some examples. That music has reached millions of people. So when you're speaking with the music supervisors, who are the people who place music in films, what kind of aspects of this music stand out to them? So there's the challenging aspect. Is there anything in terms of narrative or texture which stands out as well?
Yeah, I think working with, kind of classical music or contemporary music, you might find that, especially if it's largely experimental, supervisors can find sounds that, they haven't heard before that might really stand out to them. And they're always looking for brand new sounds to tell a story with. So that makes it set apart as something new that feels creative and different. So unique sounds and like design sounds, or signature sounds as they like to call them, which we can find a lot of in this kind of music.
So that is very interesting, because I think the very thing which makes contemporary classical music in concert quite sort of challenging to listen to, there's quite a strong structure, very interesting exploratory sounds, actually becomes its USP in this world. Sounds are being made that cannot be replicated or are not being replicated in other genres.
Definitely. Yeah, I'd agree with that for sure.
I think this leads nicely to Jobina as a composer who has a very unique sound. I'd like to explore, maybe from a composer's perspective, can you maybe give us a background into your work, and what kind of work you were doing before this project that we worked together on?
Yeah, I can. Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Jobina Tinnemans. I'm a composer, and beautifully introduced by Dan. And I was trained as a classical pianist, and then start working in electronic music as the whole development of synthesizers and the digital revolution progressed. And I'm now combining all tools you can work with. So it's conventional acoustic instruments and electronics. And that's how I actually got into this into this project.
Fantastic. And I wanted to ask really what appeals about this kind of work to you as a composer. So I obviously mentioned there is perhaps a financial benefit, but are there also creative benefits for you as well?
Yeah, there are. So it's actually quite curious how contemporary classical music is not yet as much in media music, because I was just thinking, since the invention of the transistor in 1947, synthesized music became quite a thing, and our collective sound world has expanded immensely since that invention. And we've got composers like Stockhausen who make works in their own rights, but I couldn't imagine a world where these alien sounds from synthesizers, which were new to our collective ears, weren't paired with science fiction films of the time. That was just a perfect alien film subject with alien kind of music. And from that on, things developed rapidly. And if I don't know what would have happened if that pairing would not have continued to bring us where we are right now. And in a reversed way, that development in electronic music and electronic sound worlds and sound processing has fed back into the contemporary classical music styles. And I think to give it more a connection to the general experience of the music, I think working with visuals could really contribute to the interpretation of the music. So it's quite curious how it's still as niche as it is, because actually the general world has become accustomed to distorted, granulated sounds and all these extended techniques used in the contemporary classical scene. So I think we're ready for it. We just need to find this place for it, next to it being the art form that it is.
Absolutely. And we've tried to kind of start off that project with this project called New Streams. You can actually find out more information about this by searching the hashtag New Streams on social media or following @PRS for Music. I wanted to maybe delve into what you're making when it comes to designing something to be pitched for film and TV. Would you be able to help us understand? So in concert music, you're writing a score, maybe you're using pencil and paper, maybe it's on Sibelius, and you finish your score. What did you need to create in order to have your music kind of pitched for these kinds of situations?
Yeah, it's actually it's a whole process. So if you work concert music, it needs to stand on its own feet. It's a piece of art, and it needs to be in balance from beginning to end. And then there is a limitation because it has to be quite realistic. It's meant to be performed live by live musicians. So I think that limitation is really a creative force, because I worked in electronics as well, and there's just no limit to what you can do, which is really emphasized on in the last years. But it's wonderful, but it's also restrictive because you can do too much. And I think this sort of bringing it back to, okay, this is realistic, this is what we can actually achieve with these musicians, and then these performers can just add their interpretation to it, becomes a whole different art form, a whole different experience as a listener. And then accepting or thinking like, okay, let's make this for media music. Then it turns from an art into a design, basically, and there's no need for it to stand on its own feet any longer. It can do that. But if you then accept, like, the production is actually the feet and the structure and the balance, and your music then becomes material to be part of that production, is really exciting. And when it's an art form, you have your own visual experience with it, and you leave the listener, have their own interpretation of the music. And when it becomes media music, actually it gets paired with visuals, and that gets locked in a way, in our conscience. But there comes another freedom to it, which is the visual artist's interpretation of your work, and then how that tiny bit of music that you meant in that way gets a completely different direction, interpretation, and it's a wonderful thing. And then that can feed into your development of your own practice, basically.
Fantastic. So that's a very interesting metaphor there. So concert music being perhaps art, and music written in these situations design. And I'll ask you a tough question now.
Okay.
About something I mentioned earlier, which is our kind of idea of the musical work. And the musical work, I think, historically has been associated with art. And as I mentioned, performers play the musical score exactly how a composer has written it. But of course, we have something that's quite different here. So do you think doing this challenges our notion of what the musical work is? And do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, or just it doesn't matter?
I hear around me people like, not sure, I have this vision and that this is what the music should be. And it's a form of control as an artist about your work. And I'm like, I think everything can coexist. I think being in control of your artwork is great. Writing for concert music, you're never entirely in control because there's the interpretation of the performers, which is exciting. And that's a big difference between writing for performers or making electronic music, because you're entirely in control there. I find that very interesting. I think there's such different forms that you can put shapes, you put music in. I think sometimes we just miss out on vocabulary here in music. You always end up in very general, descriptions of something that is actually very complex. But I think all these kind of different variations of one piece can just coexist. I think it's up to the composer to think, do I want to do that myself? Or am I allowing other people to make these variations in music? Or, it's really up to them. I think we're with 8 billion people on this planet, and there's so much room for everything. I think 7 million people might be Swifties, so we've still got 1 billion left to work with. But yeah.
Great. I wanted to maybe explore that a little bit more and maybe shed some light on, when you're working with a director or a music supervisor and you have a piece of music, sometimes it may be as straightforward as just placing the music into the film. But I think Pusher are quite interesting because you're quite flexible, I think. And, someone could come to you and say, this music is great, but there's some speaking in this scene. So can you just take the French horns out? Can you explain a little bit, about how you work with people and that kind of interaction?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely a process that we kind of go through quite a lot, usually with a lot of changes being asked for by our clients, and usually for the better. But we work in a way where a lot of the music we make is kind of modular, so that we can swap things out, in and out as needed, work with stems. But we're always thinking in that mindset of things that can change, which can be tricky, if you're recording an orchestra or recording strings, but thinking about that process in a way that's going to sort of benefit us further down the line if we get asked to change things.
Definitely. And so when you're making a recording, you're not just having an orchestra and setting a microphone. You're actually breaking off the different sections into rooms, maybe recording lines individually.
Yes, that can be done for sure. I think, a lot of composers do that as well for their work. So,
yeah, very interesting. So kind of adapting the musical work so you can be as flexible as possible when you have those sort of questions or demands come in from clients.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you both very much. Anything else you'd like to add before we open up?
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing that hasn't been mentioned before with contemporary classical music is that if it's for concert, it's made with this limitation of being realistic. But then if you bring it to media music, you have the freedom to just work with the sound, and you can actually create works further than you can make them hyper realistic. You're allowed to work in the production, and that's the chance that I think a lot of contemporary classical live music doesn't get. You don't get the opportunity to create things that are technically impossible or humanly not possible, maybe because of the layering or the kind of sound processing that's added to it. But it is just another opportunity to create more interesting sounds that that this genre has on offer.
Thank you very much. So I guess my sort of call to action, I suppose, is maybe, I think a lot of publishers and labels are very much attuned to this kind of work and do fantastic jobs. Obviously, they're placing music already in films, but perhaps as an industry, we can think about there is another world there that we can interact with. And maybe there are some, we can adapt the way we work and the way we make recordings, maybe do a few extra things in order to bring this work into new and interesting places. So thank you very much. That ends the Q&A. Could we give a round of applause to Jacob and Jobina, please?
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
So we have some time for questions. Does anybody have anything for Jacob or Jobina?
Hello, I'm Lars Hannibal from Copenhagen, and I run a label and also a musician, and I have worked with composers from many places in the world, commissioned a lot of contemporary pieces, and that's actually why I started my label 17 years ago, to record contemporary music. So this is just my background. But I have a question regarding recording, because I never thought about when I record in the highest format DXD to make the absolutely best recording. And I never thought about that I should make another recording where I separate the strings from the horns and whatever to make it possible to get into the licensing for films. But would you recommend that I change my attitude, my mind, to make recording so it's possible to license for films? Because making money out of contemporary music in the normal way, forget it. So maybe I should find another way of using even my back catalog, which is already quite large, and for the future to think about this is where I could use all the contemporary music that is amazing for earning some money, both for the label and for the composers, musicians.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think creatively it can mean a big difference, can't it? If you're recording things separated and all together in a room, obviously you'll lose the performance of the room sound, which, might make a recording stand out and make it quite special. So there's no right way or real answer, but if you're thinking if it suits the piece of music that you're making, that you might want to try different variations of it or something like that, it could be a benefit for sure. But also, a lot of supervisors place music without stems, just in their sort of natural recorded form, straight into films as well. So that's always an option.
Yeah, I'd maybe add another thing to that, which is maybe it depends on a piece-by-piece basis as well. So you may have a piece of music where there's a really interesting texture, maybe in the strings or, in another section, and you think, oh, actually, there's something in this. It's really worth recording this part separately. There's no one-size-fits-all purpose. It's worth having to think about, though.
Do you need to be a member of Pusher to come in contact with you, or?
No, we can say hello afterwards for sure.
Great. Do we have any other questions? I can see a hand there.
Hello, I'm Gunther, Brussels Philharmonic. Thank you for sharing these very interesting ideas. We have been very active in the film music industry. We have recorded, I think the last 20 years, over 100 soundtracks for films. We have seen a downfall for major films recording with symphony orchestra. Now I gather why. That's why you got on the market, I guess, but that's a joke. But something that I found out the last couple of years, that is, if I have my numbers right, that is that the money worldwide spent on music for games is even bigger than the money spent on films, etc. So my question is indeed, are you also into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I know you have some clients in the game industry, and I'll pass the microphone to you very shortly, but I wanted to share some figures from the organization I work for, PRS for Music. So online revenue has now become the largest source of income that we distribute to our members. So in 2022, which was the last time we announced our financial results, we paid out over 333 million from online sources, so such as gaming, from the streaming platforms like Netflix, and also from the Spotifys and Apple Musics of the world. And that accounts for around a third of the royalties that we pay out to our members, which is obviously one of the things which prompted me to start this project. So absolutely, there's huge growth in the market. The latest year-on-year growth that we've seen from the online market was 25%. So from 21 to 22, the revenue in terms of royalties we paid out increased by 25%, which is massive growth. Can you talk a bit more about games?
I can specifically. I mean, a lot of the clients we work with who do entertainment marketing and AV studios that are building cuts for, trailers and promos for films are also doing video games. So creatively very, very similar in the space that we're using and the composers that we work with, for sure. It's definitely a growing industry as well with the rise of Meta and all the rest of it. So yeah, it's a big focus for us.
Ian.
I don't need the mic. What is the difference, Jacob, between this type of special project and library music, where library music is a different split for the composer and producer because it's library music? Is some of what you do, would it fall into that category, or is it all more specialist use as you describe?
Yeah, I think we're sort of, a lot of companies like us would have a catalogue of music necessarily, and that could be considered as a library as well. But it's sort of 50-50 balance of doing bespoke music and pitching music from our catalogue as well. So, it kind of works on both sides, really.
Yeah, I would maybe add, with this kind of model that we've presented, which starts with concert music and takes it to films, is maybe, well, I certainly believe that the music is bolder and more challenging and more ambitious. And as you mentioned earlier, this is what a lot of directors are looking for. So I would say that's perhaps one of the reasons that is maybe marked slightly differently from standard library music.
Would agree on that one. I think library music has got its place as well. I don't know. It's less dedicated and less custom, tailor-made, but that's also necessary for productions. And then this is the haute couture kind of equivalent.
Great. Any more hands around the room? Any more thoughts? Any examples that you've come across in the wild that you'd like to share? I mean, you don't have to. Oh, I can see a hand there.
Hi, it's just a quick question. How do you deal with composers, especially concert music composers who are control freaks and don't want someone to take the clarinets out of their music,
I guess. I think we always try to respect an artist's artistry and what they're doing, and obviously want them to be happy with the end result of what they're making, and it's super important for that. Otherwise, it can be complicated. So, but there has to be a level of openness and collaboration within the space. There's so many creatives involved that realistically, everyone's going to have a difference of opinion So it's always kind of just working, balancing expectations, and trying to get the best creative that everyone's happy with.
It's a co-production. So if you would like to be part of a co-production, then that's what it is. Yeah. So it's finding the middle grounds. Agree.
Two more hands. Yeah, one at the back first, and then I can spot yours as well, Hannibal.
Hello, Matthew Peterson, composer from Sweden. Like many composers, this is a new world for me. And in Sweden, I've heard that, I have existing recordings with different labels, one self-produced, my company, and I've heard the advice that music supervisors prefer to work with publishers. What advice would you have for a composer sort of wanting to get involved in the process of getting these recordings with different companies in front of people? I assume that's what Pusher does. Do you feel that, I'm wondering about that sort of negotiation that from what I've heard, music supervisors prefer to work with publishers just for ease of making the paperwork and contracts and things. Does that make sense? My question?
Yeah, of course. I mean, a lot of publishers these days, music publishers, that's a big focus for them, pitching for sync as well and working within that space and trying to get results for their artists and writers. So, there's a lot of publishing companies that have sync divisions and teams that are pitching music like we do every time. We're also a music publisher and a label sort of in a traditional sense as well with this kind of music and in this space. So, and in terms of advice and getting it to those places, sort of obviously building a portfolio and finding the right fit for you creatively is probably the best way to go. Speaking to as many people as possible, getting as much feedback as you can, all of those kinds of things, and just being open to the process.
Even with existing recordings that have been released?
Yes, if you own the rights for them and control them, then it makes sense.
Or if other companies control the rights, I would coordinate with them about sync possibilities.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, for sure. You could speak to them about that, and also if you find your own avenues as well.
Yeah, I'd maybe add to that in terms of advice I can give you. Publishers really know their stuff when it comes to rights. In classical music, there are publishers that have been operating for over 200 years. They know their stuff really well. But as a composer, you can brush up on your rights as well. So, find out what the different rights that are granted to you are. For example, you own the synchronization right to your music if you're self-published. There's also the performing right in your music and the mechanical right. Sometimes they would be assigned to a PRO, like PRS. I think it's really useful to brush up on your rights, get some kind of contract templates in place, and maybe just spend some time kind of really fine-tuning your understanding in that area. Hannibal, you had a question.
Yes. Going back to the question about the composers and if they want to allow you to use it for other purposes than concerts, performances. I've been talking a lot with composers about the basic thing, is it possible to set your music free when first you have composed the music and then let it have its own life? And I've discussed this issue with many composers around the world, and I would say there is a change at the last 5-10 years. So more composers says, okay, you have recorded it and it's beautiful. This is how we want it, and now we back off and say, now it's up to you to get it out to the world. And if it needs something special like commercial use in films or commercials, then it's okay with me, as long as what you give is the best, and I have accepted the recording. So this is a new attitude from many composers. I know composers that would never allow me to use their music in films, but it is only a very few of them. And also I think it's different if you are making films to a specific music, then it's something else. If you have a symphony or symphonic work and you are doing some music or some film to this music, then it's a question of shall it have a narrative, and if it have a narrative, then the pictures, the narrative will take over and the music will disappear. And I have been working with this for some years. We made a film on a symphonic poetry on 20 minutes by a Danish composer and called Marine. And we had to have 3 directors who could understand it was not the pictures, the film, but the music that was the essential part. So we have to change. For the 2 first directors couldn't find out. They want to have a love story inside the music, which the composer would never accept. But there's something else. So we made a computer-generated images film with no narrative. And that was 5 years ago. So it was the first ever made for symphonic work. But this is an interesting question. If the pictures, the ideas the composer have with the music, if it works together with the films, the pictures, that would definitely take over the music because it's so much stronger, the visual thing, than the audio thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in recent years, perhaps we've seen a bit more of a development, particularly I think when it comes to trailers, is how these pictures that contemporary composers have in their minds in particular are kind of aligned with the sorts of sounds that people are producing in trailers, which I suppose has prompted, a lot of the thoughts which led to this project. So, hopefully there are many more opportunities out there in the future. Another question in the front row.
Hi, I'm Silvia from Pentaton. I have a question for Pusher, 1 or 2 questions. So I wanted to know, as it wasn't clear, do you also work or rework with tracks already released on labels? So catalog already for labels, and the other way around, are works published by you then also eventually released on any of the labels?
Yes, to both questions, exactly. We represent labels as well, and also artists that control music that they've made, and we don't have any creative involvement with as well. So that can be, another avenue for us. But likewise, we also release music that we might find if it finally ends up in a trailer or something, then we might want to release it in tandem with that so that, people seeing the trailer can hear it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any more questions before I go in once, go in twice? Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you to Jacob and Jobina. My gift to you this morning is 10 minutes, so I think we finished 10 minutes early. So go and grab yourselves a coffee or something, and thank you very much for coming. I hope that was useful to listen to.